Good morning. You're listening to WXOX 97.1 FM in Louisville, Kentucky, or perhaps you're streaming on WXND 100.9, our sister station. This is Artist Talk with LVA, the show produced by Louisville Visual Art, and I'm the host, Keith Waits, talking to, I have this phrase, I say old friend of the show, and I don't know, I think Vian Sora is, maybe this is her third time on the show, so I think she qualifies as an old friend of the show. But Vian is a first generation immigrant painter addressing the effects of war and displacement. Soren prides herself in being a self-taught artist. She currently works in Louisville, Kentucky. She's received degrees in computer science and an MBA. She studied printmaking under the tutelage of Süleyman Tekan at the Istanbul Museum of Graphic Arts, which is also called IMOGA. Yeah, I guess is the way that is pronounced as an acronym. Sora has exhibited in Louisville, Baghdad, Istanbul, and Dubai, including the Dar Al Sid Museum in Kuwait, Moga, and the Topkapi Palace, Istanbul. Her work has been collected by the Speed Art Museum and KMAC. Her newest work can be seen in What You Shout into the Woods Echoes Back, her solo show opening tomorrow, March 5th, at Moremen Gallery and running through April the 2nd, 2022. Vian Sora, welcome.
Thank you. It's actually the opening is on Friday, March 4th.
Oh, okay. So I got my dates mixed up. This is airing on the 3rd, so I'm correct that it's tomorrow,
Okay.
but I got my numbers wrong. Okay.
Okay.
That's a
Well,
see.
thank you, Keith. Good to be here.
Thank goodness you are accurate. So you and I haven't talked for a while. I think it's been maybe a couple years since you had a show, and you've had a lot going on in your life. So this exhibit that you have, this solo show at Moremen Gallery, um, uh, I know you had this residency in Germany, so I want you to talk about that. I'm thinking, from what I've heard, that this work, of course, connects very much as to what was going on with that residency in Germany. So talk about what we're going to find if we visit the gallery and where it comes from at this time.
So, what you shout in the woods echoes back is actually a German saying, and it was kind of summing up the idea and the whole kind of vibe of being in Berlin. I started this residency for 2.5 months. It was supported by the Great Meadows Foundation and in collaboration with artist Said Balabeki. Said in English is easier. Said Balabeki, who hosted gave me his studio and the Academy of Art in Berlin. So it was a wonderful opportunity actually to be in a city that I've, you know, lastly, it was the last city that I visited before the pandemic in 2019. It was always a place of kind of, I wouldn't call it just inspiration, but it is a city that is parallel to Baghdad, where I was born, for me, because both the cities were decimated by war, and one of them, in the case of Berlin, it's rebuilt, but also the rebuilding process didn't really took place heavily until the 90s. So for me, those two parallel cities were kind of in conversation in my head that I wanted to go, since I can't go back to Iraq. I wanted to experience being it for a longer time in Berlin. And the work and the exhibition mainly is the work from that residency. There were a couple of works that I started for Floodgates, my exhibit last year at Moremen Gallery. One of them is Riverbed, and it's the main piece that you see in the invite. But I completed this work actually, sadly, for the sad reasons, when the tornado in Kentucky hit. And it kind of, that painting made sense to be completed in the way you're going to see it, hopefully. So yeah, the show mainly deal with that kind of experience of being in Berlin. And while I was there, sadly, that's when Al Shands, who supported the residency, passed away. So it kind of, just the meaning of being there and the general vibe of my work in the studio completely took a different shape. So this whole exhibit deals with all these emotions and, experiences that happened within that time period.
Your work always seems to draw on, I guess the easiest word is sort of dark themes, experience of sort of destruction, devastation, loss. And it's interesting that you talk about the tornadoes in Western Kentucky having this influence on you, because when you first came to Louisville, I remember you were labeled, was it the war artist or something? It was
Yeah,
there was
yeah,
sort of a tag put on you.
which is fine somehow because honestly, I feel like this is how people can deal with it. This is how people can place you in their mind. And
Hmm.
my work continue to have these themes, but it's really somehow, I wouldn't say it's about rebirth from these situations, but a lot of these, you're going to see these works in this exhibit. It's how we deal with things. It's how we stand up from um, these terrible situations, but also how universally we're all connected. Like I mean, just even watch it's what happening in Ukraine. So I could relate to that on a whole different level. And also it's the universality of art and its role. We are never separated as much as we think. As much as there is a divide in this country right now, we're not separated. Everything is connected, and I feel that art and these experiences somehow try to deal with these things. It's never resolving anything, but at least in my case, is how I connect to my existence. I don't dwell necessarily just in the past, but it's also how to transition to the next thing. So you'll see a lot of works have these themes of regrowth over bodies that doesn't necessarily make sense visually. I don't like to give it out and completely give you the answers, but
Hmm.
you'll see a regrowth. You'll see a lot of regrowth in areas of the paintings. And we could elaborate on that as well. So yeah, sorry for interrupting.
No, 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 no. Hey, we're here to listen to you. We want to hear you
Yeah.
talk.
Mhm.
But just like the idea of the tornadoes and the loss of Al Shan's, sort of expands that it's so much more than war, and that it's. But you talked about the universality of these things too, and when my thoughts as we watch what's happening in Ukraine right now is that
Mhm.
I tend to get very, very, very cynical about those kinds of situations, and I
Yeah.
don't want to go into a whole sort of Jeremiah about Putin, what I think is going on there. But I think that in America, we
Mhm.
always are so distanced
Mhm.
from these conflicts. They always seem so far away. Well, as much as we talk about the technology bringing us closer together, the global village, and all these kinds of things, and trade
Mhm.
and commerce and I still feel like America feels very, very distant from all of the real sort of war conflicts, and then our own reality has taken a sort of a turn for the absurd uh,
Yeah.
about what happens in our own communities, in our own streets. But do you ever have an understanding that that you're touching upon something much more fundamental, that it's maybe that your work is touching upon the conflict between like order and chaos, and how that just seems like rebirth is only possible because of
Mhm.
chaos and perhaps destruction, one could argue. Do you
Yeah.
think that way about it, or how much are you being specific to achieve universality?
Um, I do think about it in this way. I do not accept it necessarily, but it's like when you burn a forest, you stimulate regrowth in a different way, but you really can't apply this on human beings and lives and the way we know it. But it's also how I place myself. I can't keep dwelling on, I left Iraq 16 years ago, and also, but it's still continuously affecting my life. Everything that happened in my country because of war and because of destruction and because of the aftermath up to this point is influencing my work somehow and my family life, because my family is still not settled fully here. So, but also for me, it's like, what is the meaning of being here? What do I add or take from here? So I just don't separate myself anymore. I don't think this is, here is an Iraqi artist in Kentucky or Louisville. I don't just stand and represent just this genre. I think I'm part of a bigger conversation now. And also, I feel like we really live in a very interesting city and region. It's really misunderstood as well up to this moment, and my work deal with that as well. And then just even going back to the death of Al Shans, this is a man who really contributed in the scene and contributed to my life. And it was very kind of symbolic in a way where it's like, what are the odds that this person will pass and you don't see him again during this residency while I'm dealing with subjects of death and rebirth. So all these things really played in the work. I don't know if that answered or connected the question. Um, but yeah, I feel that way as well.
Well, it seems like I feel like what you're saying in a nutshell is that wh- while you still have your connection to Baghdad and Iraq, you are an American artist now.
Yeah.
That your work is all coming from the perspective of somebody living in Louisville,
Mhm.
residency in Germany, and I know
Mhm.
you travel other times. You know, you mentioned, but that you really have. So that you're sitting in Louisville making
Mhm.
work from this position, and your work is connecting still to the world.
Yes, absolutely. But also it's the artists in the first maybe 20 years of their lives, their work would be influenced or about something, about their identity, about who they are, about what really influenced their lives or changed it to good or bad. But I think in my case, and a lot of other artists, when you cross that line of 40, and when you cross the line where you're doing these solo exhibitions every year or every whatever the amount of the separation between your exhibitions, at that point where I am right now, the work is about the work itself, you know.
Mm.
The works inform me. The work is from life, and also being in Louisville been the biggest influence. You know, dealing with the frustrations and the events, but also there are some great things that happen in my life here. So it is part of that scene. It does, yes, I do look at myself now as an American artist, but I also think of myself as a, you know, an international person. I don't feel like I fully belong anywhere. And this is what happened with a lot of artists who moved from not just the Middle East, but any country that is culturally completely different, and they had to adjust through decades. It takes decades to adjust, but then you really don't fully belong back to where you come from. You
Mm.
know, this is what really launched you to the world, that and from that experience. So I do feel everything is connected for me, you know, just being here, traveling, or also being around other artists is a huge thing for me. It really what influenced my work. So I've been exposed to an intense amount of exhibitions while I was in Berlin.
Mm.
And then I ended my trip in Paris where I attended an exhibition for de Kooning and Suchin. And they're the main two painters who influenced my work. And it was very monumental for me to be there because it kind of summed up 2.5 months of heavy exposure to some amazing art, but also some bad art, which also for me is a more of a teaching moment than anything else. So another long answer to your question. So,
Well, no, and of course, you know, it's kind of a cliche, but it is always true. If you're going to go
mhm,
to a European city,
mhm.
if you're going to go to London, or you're going to go to Paris, or going to Germany, while you're there, it seems like you always have a great opportunity to spring over to different kinds of cities and see that, like it's, you know, because it's like being in Louisville and running around to Chicago or.
It's very easy. It's easier, honestly, there to go anywhere than here because they have the trains and they have cheaper flights. So it's kind of easier to coordinate that. Although travel became very intense and annoying nowadays, but it's going to become normal for us in the next few years, all the procedures and everything. Um, but now, apologies, yeah. Um, but now, yeah, that made sense. I really wanted to be in that exhibit, and I actually visited Aix-en-Provence, where I met with a curator who was working with me on an exhibit and a group exhibit at the CAC this spring. So it was also very eye-opening because it was a whole different region and whole different exposure to different art. So yeah, I mean, it was hopping to these other cities. Although when I was in Berlin, I only did very few side trips, and I just really needed to be in Berlin for an intense time and be fully exposed and immersed. And it took a month to set up this studio. So that kind of at half of my time. But it was very interesting process too.
How long were you there?
About 2.5 months. So I think I was one of the first people to arrive after they opened because it was chaotic and the airport. They lost my luggage and they opened their new airport that took 12 years to build. And it was kind of part of that, you know, that was the first kind of connections that, oh, COVID, it's, you know, influencing everything and affecting everything. And also it took forever to find a place. I actually stayed in I couldn't find an apartment because no one was renting. So I got a really great deal in a smaller hotel where they gave me a bigger room and I was in it for all that time. And it was in the middle of Mitte, in an area where a lot of things happened. Rosa Luxemburg, it's a street where there was a lot of things that happened historically, and you could see I call it the ugly tower. I'm not offending the Germans, but I really don't like that tower. You know, so you open your window and that tower is in front of you, and you know, it was very interesting, intense, inspiring. You know, you feel awkward because there are no tourists, which actually made me feel, you know, you don't expect that. So you just hear you know, you see German tourists, and then towards the end, there were more tourists coming in because it was Berlin Art Week. So there were a lot of people coming from elsewhere. But it was a different experience than when I went there in 2019, and it was packed with tourists. So that eerie feeling, which also I enjoy not having tourists, obviously, that really contributed into some of the things that happened with the work later. So it was interesting to be in.
Did you make new connections, new relationships during that residency?
Yes, I mean, it wasn't really my goal. I kind of figured because everybody was still worried about getting together and, you know, a lot of people were still quarantining. I felt it was organic. So I met a lot of artists through my artist connection there, and a couple of gallerists, and, you know, just random connections that a couple of them remained. I mean, still in touch. Maybe one gallery that something I don't know might happen with, but it was I decided to focus on the work versus just, and, you know, have expectations from connecting with someone. But also the biggest influence was the artist who hosted me, Said Balabeki, and his family, because he come from a family of artists. His brother Ayman is going to represent Lebanon in the Venice Biennale, which I was planning to fly to, but I don't think I could right now. So that was the biggest influence because Said is very well versed in you know, just the scene there, and took me to tons of places. And his professor also, Professor Held, he's an artist who also he brought some students to my studio, and we had this kind of communication. But it was really, if you think about it, it was a very brief time to do all these things and also paint. So um, I don't even remember I slept that much, honestly, because I was in the studio. In the end, I was in the studio for a very long time. But also, I didn't want to miss anything.
Well, you could
And
sleep when you got back to America.
yeah, but also, you know, I tried to walk the city everywhere. I will walk a different route every day, and it really allows you to see the place in a different way versus moving in trains and Uber rides, which were very cheap around that time, by the way, to take an Uber because there are no tourists. So, so yeah, that was really an interesting way to do a residency. And I think I was so lucky because I didn't have any, you know, big problems. Apologies. Yes. Um, are we back? Yes.
Yeah, we're back.
Um, so yeah, I think I was very lucky to do the residency in the way I did. So.
Well, and I want to ask you, and I don't know, we've talked before, so maybe we touched on this, but I wonder when you talk about these kind of issues, the things that you're dealing with in your work, um, is how how much how much of your identity as a woman comes into the way you approach your work, or do you think it doesn't? Do you think that you just have a sort of more straightforward artistic relationship with these subjects and themes?
I mean, that's actually a very interesting question because I don't know how to say this on air in a not a very strange way, but because there was a different side of me. There was a masculine side of me that kind of rise up in Berlin. You know, it's you're on your own. There was an incident that happened in front of me in a train. You know, the train where a woman was assaulted, which is very rare for Berlin. Um, but then I was very aware of being a woman after that. I was kind of, you know, letting loose because for someone like me, who I'm originally from Baghdad, where I've seen things where makes a lot of things sound very safe. You know, I lose my safety guard when I'm not in Iraq, which is actually not a very smart thing to do, but it's kind of organic. But after that incident on the train, I became very aware of who I am and that, you know, um, and it's, I don't think I really think about being a woman when I'm painting. I started being aware of certain things like I was told that, oh, it's great that you work with very large scale because this is something that was kind of exclusive to male artists. And to hear comments like this, which is very natural to hear these things, even now where there are artists who are in their 90s, female artists in their 90s or 80s doing these elaborate installations in massive places. But there are still these comments or thoughts or expectations that because I'm a female artist, I cannot do a large scale work. So I can't tell you how many times I had accidents in the studio because I choose the biggest canvas. And you know, my work doesn't just sit and paint it. My work is a very, the process is very dynamic, you know. There are a lot of movement, a lot of falling, a lot of, you know, just flipping the canvas until it settles. So um, so that's when I'm aware that, you know, you're aware not only of your necessarily being male or female or, you know, or both, but also you're aware of your mortality because you know that, you know, a thought that really kept reappearing in my head is that, okay, I'm physically not as strong as before because I also broke my heel that, and it didn't heal since 2 years while I was painting. But okay, how do I, the urgency of work, and this is why I finished this amount of work in a short time that really, it took its toll on my health, but I don't regret it. And I became very aware of this subject of mortality, how much time you have and how much work you want to do. And it might sound very morbid, but you know, it is true. You know, we're not going to live forever as, and artists are very aware of that in a different way. You know, I started putting on my calendars, okay, how many paintings I need to complete or execute, because I don't like to do quick work. And some of the paintings take 2 years because I feel the best work happens when you leave the paintings for a while and you come back and everything makes sense after 6 months. And this is what happened with a lot of work that was in my studio from the last year. But after I came back from Berlin, it just made sense. This is how it's going to be completed. So yes, that was the answer.
Well, and the reason, I asked that question because I feel we're clearly in a time. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about of the moment, but um, that I feel like in sort of my time in this world of the visual arts, I see a much greater focus on individual identity and what that means to an artist. Being a woman, being a BIPOC, being in transition, being all these different kinds of things, and that I feel like there was a time. Identity is always important, I think, to artists, but I think there was a time when identity always took a back seat, like the art speaks for itself. But I think more
Mhm.
and more, I keep finding that there are a lot of artists who those questions about their identity or the way they want to represent themselves are becoming more and more tied in to the work they're creating in a much more direct way. And so I just
Mhm.
wondered about that, thinking about your themes, which you know war, destruction, and rebirth. There's no sort of gender claim on these themes, but um, it seems like a lot of when we talk about warfare, we talk about it seems like there's a lot of sort of masculine energy that drives a lot of these points of conflict in society.
I mean, definitely. I think it's impossible to elaborate on the first part of, the statement there. It's impossible for an artist specifically, or a writer as well, to ignore the identity aspect of their work. Our work is, for me, it's a given, but also for me, as again, going back to my roots, it was a big taboo to be an artist, female artist, and the time I was in Iraq. And by taboo, I mean, you could do certain things, but you cannot really portray the female body then.
Hmm.
So this is why I still, I'm interested in painting in the same way, in this very primitive way. I, kind of represent breasts or certain body parts that could offend a lot of people. And it's still even here, and I'm just, for me, I don't see it this way because it's something that was denied to me to approach within my work. And I was even told by different male artists, in let's say in the Middle East, that maybe I should avoid working with realism or figuration, and I need just to focus on abstract. And I understand until now, I'm a lot of association with me as an abstract artist, which is, I don't, I mean, I might change my work and completely, like, I don't think artists should be defined in a certain way, indefinitely, because we change, we evolve, and I personally reflect what I live. But definitely being a female artist, being from where I am, is there in my work. I mean, just look at the colors as well. The new colors are very feminine, but also there is very masculine side to it. But then also, what really defines feminism or being female in terms of color? So it's there, and I definitely think my identity is my work, because I am learning a lot about who I am through my work. I'm becoming more vocal in terms of talking about this, because I was very secretive for a long time, just scared of surveillance. I was living, even when I lived in Dubai, even when I moved here until a few years ago, I was never feeling safe. So that is part of the work, hiding identity, revealing things that people don't expect to be revealed, but then hiding things that is common sense. And that dichotomy is very, clear and there within the paintings.
When you talk about, so you talk about that your work, it sounds like maybe there's a sense of discovery about your own self. Like, does your work surprise you sometimes? Do you look at things and think that you've gained insight into yourself after you've gone to a certain place with your work, or is the work always following your own growth?
I think it's both, really, because I'm not the kind of artist that I'm going to pre-plan the painting to where it has to be 100 or even 50% what I intended. I approach my work in a way where I wouldn't say the word intuitive, because somehow women shouldn't say, because it's expecting, but all of the work is intuitive, male or female. It's something that, like, hitting you and appearing in visually or psychologically or as a thought, and it comes in different ways, and that's the discovery. But then how you follow that, that's when you control the work. The beginning of the work always is a discovery or a surprising factor, but when you pour yourself in the last stages of completing the work, that's when you're in control. So it is both the elements you mentioned, because it's I think it's inseparable. I think it has to be both to complete the work in an honest way. And of course, I'm learning more about myself, but I'm also learning more about how vulnerable I am and how limited I am in terms of thinking of certain techniques and not being able to execute in a certain way because you're used to a certain comfort. And it has to make sense for artists to finish the work and the way they like, versus forcing something else. So I don't know if that answered the question, but it is
Well, no, I
both.
think so, yeah. But and it's interesting
Mhm,
because you've brought up vulnerability a couple of times. When you talked about
mhm,
mortality, I think, when
mhm,
we sort of come to grips with mortality, we
mhm.
are vulnerable, and I think we
Yeah,
just don't always want to recognize or cope with it.
yeah,
Because it gets used as sort of the word vulnerability gets used as sort of a marker engaging art and artistic development, that it's a breakthrough, like to be
mhm.
vulnerable or to express your vulnerability, um, which suggests that we spend a lot of time in denial or whatever
Yeah.
about our own existence. So I didn't mean to get into a whole thing
No,
about
I
that.
like that. I like the subject because people are afraid to talk about it sometimes, but after COVID now, hey, we're completely different people, I think, even if you didn't have it or no one was, everybody was affected by this event. So that's the biggest statement that happened the last 2 years.
Right.
Mhm.
Even if you just shut yourself off and was in denial, you were
Yeah,
affected by it.
of
Uh,
course. Mhm.
and also I'm thinking as we talk about these things too, you talk about sort of like, masculine and feminine energy, and we were talking about identity, I don't know if it's just because in my world, most everybody I know or talk to is some form of artist, but
Mhm.
it seems like artists are on the forefront of always expressing those ideas, and being comfortable with them, when maybe the society overall is still struggling or not even really catching up.
Yes, and because in the professional world, you have to put a facade between who you are really and who you have to present yourself to the person who is going to pay your salary.
Right.
So, and in the art world, it's also that. But I think artists as they age, and I say this in the most positive way, aging and mortality and all these words for me, they're positive. But as we age and as we kind of figure out that we can't escape being artists and we can't escape being who we are, the best thing is to come to terms with it and also embrace who you are. And of course, the society wants us to be more eccentric and weird and sensitive and all that, and artists are like that. But I feel like there is that connection between real life reality of who we are, but also being okay with it and being unapologetic about it. I used to be very proud and very, just, I mean, I would not look like this on an interview, but now I am just, it's just, for me, it's more comfortable just not trying being something else in terms of worrying about representing my cultural background in a certain way. I'm not worried about this anymore. I'm not going to give you what you expect from me. I'm just being me, but it took me years to get to this. And I feel the process of painting and the process of putting yourself out there helped with that. But it is the most vulnerable thing, because, you could be having these victorious moments with your career and with your results in the studio, and then you hang the painting in a gallery and the spotlight on it, and you have this meltdown over something wrong in it. And that just happened to me a few days ago. I just didn't tell Susan, but the one work that everybody was crazy about, I looked at it and I was just like, oh no, should have, you know, I should have done something different. But these things happen to us and we can't rectify them, especially if you're in shows, and that's my life now. It's defined, my calendar year is defined by exhibitions and by where I'm going to be and where I'm learning from next. So
Did you keep that piece in the show? You didn't pull it.
it,
So it's there.
it is a vulnerable moment.
Okay.
It's one of these moments where I realize that this is a study and I'm not ready to put it out there, and it was way too early to put it out there. So, but I could be wrong. That's not for me. That's for curators and experts. My job is to paint and put the work out there. You
Well, and
know.
any artist is just constantly making a series of choices, from
Mhm.
color and brush and medium to business decisions or final decisions in a gallery. I mean, it's all
Yeah,
choices. And why we're
absolutely.
interested is because that ongoing series of choices makes you interesting, or
Mhm.
maybe not always predictable. And we don't know how you're going to, which direction you're going to go.
Yeah. And also, I have this obsession with the texture and with the way the initial rough texture that bothers people, but what makes the painting,
Right.
how that goes against that velvety finish that I do to create the atmosphere around the painting. So that obsession is what is really consuming my life right now. And I have to find a way to make peace with it, or find a way to actually do this like a compromise between me and my technique. And Berlin was a great way to confront that, because working in a new studio, even if you have the best art supplies in the world, you still need your stuff that you're comfortable using. But comfort doesn't get you anywhere in life, really. So I had alternatives and alternative materials to use that I normally was intimidated to by. So it gave me different results. And that initial panic of, oh my God, how I'm gonna finish this work, actually was the best thing. That intensity and that panic is very healthy for the artist. That's what really leads you to new results. So I don't know. We'll see what people think about the painting.
Well, I mean, you do have a strong reputation in Louisville, and I imagine many other places. But I know from firsthand that you do have a strong reputation in Louisville. But is that always a favor? Is that always a good thing? A very prominent artist who's been here for many, many years, I was asking the question in an interview on the radio here, but it was live in the studio. The nature of the sort of community, the sort of supportive nature of the artist, particularly for that artist generation, that they'd always been there, this sort of wonderful sort of community of people, friends, helping each other out and everything. I said, that must be, so wonderful for you. And they said, no, actually, because I'm at a point where nobody will critique me. Nobody, they all just tell me I'm wonderful. And so it was an interesting question of like,
Mhm.
you work to build a reputation, but then can the reputation
Mhm.
almost work against you as an artist when you talk about the kind of things you're talking about, the kind of risk and stuff you want to take?
Yes, I feel like I don't know what is my reputation in Louisville. I mean, apparently, I started being seen, or I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to think about it in terms of what I want from the scene, what I'm interested in. I just want to be around it. I want to see what other artists are doing. And I'm actually very passionate about even the younger artists who are just even haven't graduated. And I reach out to them. And sometimes they're confused why this older artist is reaching out to, however they think. But I'm actually interested in everybody, and interested to see how they perceive me, because actually, this is something also raw that I'm going to say. I feel like the biggest, for me, the biggest people that matter somehow to be viewed by are the other artists. Because I go into these exhibitions where somebody famous or great, or had an exhibit maybe 3 years ago that was mind blowing, but then I see their next exhibition, and in my head I think, why they did this. But I can't judge them because I could be that person. And I totally agree with that artist that you referenced, because I want people to actually write me a critique email, or just pick the phone or text me and say, hey, Vian, this is what we thought about your work. And whatever bad words they want to use, I'm okay with it, because this is how you grow. And you're not above that, even when you're about to die. And even if you're Kusama, being in a certain age and fame, nobody's above that, in my opinion. I'm very humble about it. And I think we need that critique, and we need people to not necessarily like our work, because it's not, I mean, there is a reason why there are different tastes. But also, you walk in museums and you see certain people or certain artworks have more people responded to it, and mostly they're the famous works that people just think they have to go look and stare at it, but they don't know why. And then sometimes there's in the corner these paintings or sculptures or any work that no one given attention to, and they call me somehow. It's like, why this work bothered me, why this work made me stand in front of it for an hour. And I mean, if we don't have these conversations and we don't have the differences, how we're going to actually create anything that matters. So, I mean, I agree with you. I don't know what's my reputation, but I guess it's
Well,
good to have one.
I think it's good. I think it's a good reputation
Mhm.
around this area. Um, um, but it's just an interesting question. But the other thing is, you know, that I'm thinking about when you're talking about people having some maybe calling up and saying like, I didn't like this stuff or whatever. You know, it's like,
Yeah,
well, it's like even if somebody kind of has that sort of reaction, at least it's a strong reaction. Like you provoked a strong reaction with your work.
exactly.
Yeah.
You have to. You have to. I mean, that's why I said mentioned earlier when biggest part of my learning process in Berlin was learning from the works that I didn't like. That was important work as well.
Mhm.
And I was just thinking why I didn't like that, why I had this visceral reaction. Some that was just, you have that blah thought about it, but then the visceral bad reaction, that's what the artwork should create, good or bad. Um, so yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I'm actually really would like someone to, I'm calling it out now. If someone doesn't like my work, I'm totally okay being approached about it. Just tell me what's bothering you. I'd be interested to hear.
Just don't throw tomatoes at the paintings.
Yeah, let them be sold first. What else?
All right. Well, I think that's a good note to end our
Mhm.
conversation on today, Vian. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Always
Thanks
a
for
pleasure.
having me.
And we'll just remind you, we don't need a special reason to talk to Vian Sora, but we are here today talking because she has a show opening tomorrow, March the 4th, right?
Mhm. Yes.
At Moremen Gallery down on Main Street. The show is called "What You Shout into the Woods Echoes Back," and it's at Moremen. Runs through April the 2nd. So, Vian Sora, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.